Hello, y'all students. In this video, we'll talk about debugging. So first of all, what is debugging? Debugging is a process of identifying and fixing errors in a computer program. Now, debugging is an essential tool or skill for any programmer as it allows you to identify and fix errors in your code. Generally speaking, the debugging refers to troubleshooting. Now, here we need to understand how to actually debug. Now, what it requires from us to basically identify where is the issue and what are the most efficient ways of doing that. Now, first of all, there are several ways to debug a Java program, depending on the tools and techniques that are available and the nature of the problem that is being debugged. Now, here are some common ways to debug a Java program. Well, first of all, we can use just simple print statements. One of the simplest way and most effective ways is to debug a Java program with the print statements. Basically, when you have multiple variables and you work with data, you don't get an expected output, let's say, right? You might have a logical error or a more complex error that you have in the program. So you can use print statements to actually print all of the mutations or all of the transformations of that data that is being manipulated and see actually in the console how the data is changing. Another point is going to be logging. You can actually also debug why your program doesn't work by reading the logs. A simple example would be when you have some issues in the code, Java will log the errors thrown into the console, right? So you'll have some errors thrown with a red color, and you can simply look at those errors and understand what is the source of your problem. Now, by understanding the logs, understanding the errors, you can also debug a program and identify what is the source of the problem. Programmers usually use a logging framework, such as Log4j or others, and those will give you more details on all of the steps or all of the processes that happens in the application. And the very third step is going to be debugger, which we actually going to have a couple of examples. And debugger is basically a tool that comes with your IDE. And most Java integrated development environments, which we call them IDEs, include a debugger that can be used to step through the code and inspect the values of the variables and expressions at each step. And basically just slows down the execution of the program. If you just click run button, that would be very fast, right? Now the debugger slows down the process and listens to you what actually you want to do when you debug. Now the debugger allows you to set breakpoints, single step through the code, and inspect the state of the program at any point, right? You can check what is the variable value, what is the expression, and etc. So let's go back to Eclipse for a second. Now here I have a class that is called Debugging, and I have a main method inside. I'll start writing a simple algorithm that is basically we're going to have an integer array with numbers. I will assign some values here. There's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, the next point is going to be I want to sum all of the numbers up and have them in a variable, right? So that variable is going to be sum, and the initial value for that variable is going to be 0, and that I want to calculate what is going to be the sum of all of the elements in the array and have them in that sum variable. So for this, I'm just going to create a for loop. And I'll iterate through the numbers, right? I'll start from index 0 and I will increment every time. So what I want to do here is basically I want to manipulate with the sum variable or actually add them all of the elements to this sum. So I will go ahead and say sum equals to numbers at integer at index I. Now here, ideally, I would have to go and say plus equals, right? Because we want to add each element to the sum on top of it. So we say to perform two actions. First, add whatever the value of sum is with a new value of number set I, and then assign that value to the sum. Now, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to make on purpose a problem, right? A bug. And that's going to be actually an example how we can debug and when we need to debug. The next point is going to be, I'm just going to go ahead and say system out print, and I will say the sum is, and I'll append here the sum itself. So if I go and run this program right now, so the sum in the console right now is showing that is 5. And this is basically not the output that we expect. This is definitely more than 5 because one of the elements is going to be 5 here in the array. But what about all of the other numbers, right? We want to sum everything up. So here's the point. First of all, you need to identify that you have a problem, right? So we identified that, okay, something is wrong. The output that I get is not actually that I would expect. So you kind of test your application. Not application, the program right now. Now, the second part is going to be you need to locate, well, where is your problem, right? Where the source of the problem might come from. So you go over the code. Okay, I have an integer here, which is basically not really can cause any issues because it's just a data structure that holds some value. Now, integer sum, the same issue, it just has a default value to 0, and it's some variable that it's an integer data type that would work with the data structure that we have data type, right? Now, the next point is going to be a for loop, and I understand in the for loop, I do some calculations and I do some manipulations with this sum. So basically, I understand that the source of the problem might be from this loop. So here's the point where I want to actually go ahead and start debugging that point from where that source of the problem might be. Now, the very first point that I told you is print statements, right? I can go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to add some print statements to actually go ahead and understand what is the value of that variables that basically I manipulate and see which is the value for each iteration, right? So I'm going to go ahead and for loop itself. Before doing the calculation, I'm going to say system out print. And I just want to go and say, okay, I want to print what is the value of sum. Sum is, I'm going to append here sum. I'm going to say sum. Then I'm going to say plus. I will add another one. Also comma, I is, right? I want to print what is the index that we are iterating through. And the last part is going to be that I want to print out the value of the element, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I have another part of the string, comma here, and I will say that number at I is, right? So you can come up with a strategy that you print in your own, but this is my way right now, right? So I'm going to say numbers at I, and I print each of the data that actually is used in this loop to see this in the console and to see what is being processed and manipulated. So I'm going to go ahead and run the program again. And here you go. Here we're going to have a couple of statements, which each iteration we can see, all right, the sum is 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Then we're going to go ahead and see that I changes to 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is the values of the number at I. Probably this is not the best way to put it here because sum is not being shown till the end, right? So I would go and put it right after the manipulation, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say put here. Now let's execute again and see. There you go. Now we can see that the sum, what is the value of the sums, what is the I, and so on and so forth. So this is more sophisticated way of showing up what is going on. So looking at this part, what I'm manipulating sum, right? But for some reasons, I understand, okay, sum at the beginning is 1, so it's good. Now the next element is actually 2. So I would expect that 1 plus 2 would be 3 already, right? The next point is going to be the value of element as 3. So 3 plus 3 is going to be 6 here. But what I'm getting is just a reassigning of the sum. So I can understand or figure out that, okay, this expression actually is not really correct, right? Because I reassign the value every iteration. I do not really add on top of the sum, but I just reassign the value. So I can go ahead and just say plus. So if I add that plus, I execute, I can see everything changes now as expected. The sum expected is 15, which is the output that I expect. So this is the first point that you can do. The next point, I told you that, for example, you can read the logs. Let's say you made the logical error here in the condition, right? So what you would expect here is going to be that you would get out of boundaries exception, right? If I run it, I get this error. Now, this logged in the console, right? By Java, it's thrown an error, and this is logged in the console. Now, by understanding these logs, you can also debug your program and going here, reading through this error code, reading through the messages that it gives us back, we can understand what we can fix, right? So if I read here is basically exception thread main, right? And the main method. So I understand the source of the problem is going to be first of all in the main method. Now, what is the error code that we get? Or not the error code, error name, right? Array index out of bounds exception. So, all right, so that makes sense. I'm probably going more than whatever elements we have in the array. So where do I iterate through the array? Of course, in the loop, right? So I understand the problem might come from this part. And then we have a hint, index 5 out of bounds, right? So I understand, okay, I'm starting from 0, which is totally fine, but I becomes at one point that is going to be a 5. That 5 index is not existing in the array itself. So this condition is actually allowing to go bypass that bounds. So this can be fixed by just removing that equal sign, and that's everything okay in this case. And the third way that we're going to use to debug a program is basically using the debugger from the IDE. This actually, whatever IDE you would use nowadays, would it be Eclipse, would it be IntelliJ, VS Code, NetBeans, etc., you would have that debug mode integrated in the IDE. Of course, the interface of that is going to be a little bit different from each to another IDE that you would use. For example, in Eclipse is going to be a specific kind of buttons there, but the whole logic is going to be the same in all of them. So in this video, we're going to look at the debugger in the Eclipse, and let's get into an example and see how to use that. So you can see here, first of all, here's a panel that actually in Eclipse you're going to have dedicated for the debugging. So this is going to be in a button of a bug. Once you click that, it's going to actually prompt you to switch to a debug mode. And once you're in debug mode, you can go ahead and slow down your program and just identify where the issue comes from. Now I'm going to go back to Eclipse. What we want to do here is I'm going to go ahead, remove this line of code. Remove the print statements, execute again, everything is fine now. And let's go remove that plus button and execute again. And let's assume again, the sum that we are getting in the console is not the one that we expect. So what is going to be another way of actually debugging this is using debug of the IDE. How do we debug? Well, first of all, you need to understand, okay, once you identified you have a bug or you have a problem, you need to identify where is the source. And as we talked before, the source comes from the for loop. So here I'm going to go ahead and I'm interested in to debug the for loop. So here you go ahead and just double click on the line that you want to put the breakpoint. Breakpoint is where your program is going to slow down and it's going to listen to your steps. So I'm going to double click on this. You're going to see this little circle here. That means you toggled a breakpoint. how to take it off is the same approach. You just double click on that line and that's going to take it off. Now you can also right click on this, on the lines that you have here, right? And you right click and you can toggle breakpoint manually. It's going to be the same, just instead of double clicking. Okay, once identified, okay, the loop starts at line 11. I'm going to put a breakpoint there and I want to debug it. So instead of just hitting the run button, I'm just going to go ahead and run in the debug mode, right? So I'm going to go and click on this bug. Now here's going to be a switch perspective window. Of course, we want to switch and we will go into a new window here. So here's going to be a couple of perspectives that you can look at. In the left side is going to be what thread is running right now and what is happening in the stack. This is actually not very important for now. Right now is what we're going to focus on is the right side, right? So the right side is going to be showing you the variables. And this is the data actually that we want to keep the track of. So you can use here breakpoints to see how many breakpoints you have, at what line is located at, expressions. You can put some new expressions like some validations and etc. But the most important part is going to be this variables. Now here we go ahead and understand, okay, the args comes from the arguments that we have in the main method. And here comes the numbers. Numbers is going to be our array, right? So if I toggle this, we're going to have all of the indices here of the numbers, and we're going to have the values of those elements, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is good. I can see the representation of the array. And the next part is going to be sum, which sum is going to be value 0, which is totally fine. At the beginning, sum should be 0. And here comes, you go ahead and start actually debugging. Now for this example, we're going to use the step over because step over is actually executing one line of code and it shows you what changed here, right? Now you're going to have another button here, which is step into. Step into we're going to use when we want to debug a specific method. So I recommend you to not step into in any predefined methods, because you're going to go in the methods that Java developers developed, right? And which is not really necessary to debug. But you can step into all of the methods that you created by yourself and debug them. So for now, for this example, we're going to use just step over, just to execute one line of code and see what changed. So I'm going to go step over. We have the first line. We're going to have additional I here, right? Because the I got initialized, and we step over again. Okay, so now you can see the sum changed to 1, which is good, right? Because, well, 0 plus 1, we calculate the sum, and it's going to be 1, which first iteration doesn't tell me anything about the error. We'll go to the next one. So I'm going to step over again, and we'll see the I changed to 1. So the index is 1 now. It's going to come to the element that has the value of 2. We step over again, and we can see here the sum changed to 2. Well, I already understand, okay. So I had 1 before, and if I add 2 on top, it's going to be 3, but I'm getting 2. So there is a problem with my sentence or with the operation that I'm doing. So let's go step over again. Let's see what happens next. I have I2. I2 is going to be 3 now. So what happens once we execute this statement? Well, sum gets to 3 now. Okay, so this means I'm not really doing the addition here, but I'm just reassigning the value. So here at this point, I actually understood, okay, this is the problem. I can just stop the execution of the debug mode, or you can go step over till the end, right, to see each iteration. But I already understand that here is the problem, and instead of adding on top of the sum, I just reassign the value. So I go ahead and say stop the debug mode, add that plus on top, run simply, and I see the sum as 15, and that's how I fix the program. The next step is going to be, okay, what if we have some custom methods, right? So let me write an example that is actually going to have a custom method. And it's going to be the same one instead of me doing the code here, I'm just going to create a method for that is going to be public. We'll have static and we'll return an integer as a sum. And I'm going to say this method name is going to be calculate sum. I'm going to take as a parameter an integer array of numbers. And I'm going to go ahead and do the calculation here. So I'm going to have an integer sum here. There's going to be 0 at the beginning. I'm going to create a loop that is going to iterate through the numbers array. So I'm going to go ahead and do this correctly here, plus equals. And I'm going to say numbers at index 0. At index I. And let's say here in the condition, I'm going to say -1 here. Just, I thought, okay, I need to go ahead before the last index and I did a -1, right? I don't pay attention to this one, to the operator that I'm using, right? So this is going to be our bug. And let's try to identify this with the debugger. So I'm going to return the sum. And this is going to be actually the sum calculated with a method. I'm going to go ahead and remove that loop from the main method. And to the integer sum, I'm now not going to assign a specific value. I'm going to go ahead and assign whatever the calculate sum of numbers will give me as an output. So we go and execute one time, and what we get is actually 10, which is interesting as a different number, but I expect a different number, right? Because I know what is the output. I know there's going to be 15, but why I'm getting 10? So let's go ahead and identify this with the debugger. So here, the interesting point is going to be, okay, where the error comes from. Now I'm looking at this main method, and there is going to be another method inside of the main that I call, that I created by myself, calculate sum. So this is actually where the source of the problem comes from. So okay, I'm going to go ahead and put it breakpoint here. Let's actually start from line 9. It's not going to hurt us. So starting from there, I want to debug it, and I will want actually to debug the code that we have in this method. So I'm going to go ahead, click on run debug button, and we'll start our debugging process. So I'm going to go step over here because this is just an array. The array gets initialized and all of the indices and etc., which is totally fine. Now look at this. First of all, I'm going to do step over here. If I'm going to step over, you can see here we executed that line and we get the output that is going to be 10. And, nothing more. And that's it, right? We didn't really debug what is in the method itself. So what I have to do, I'm going to restart this. I'm going to go to debug again. And what I want to do in this line is not step over, but step into. Because I have a method that I want to step into. In that method, I want to debug whatever is happening there. So if I step into, look at this. We navigate to the method body. And here we go, we're going to see here the numbers. The numbers got initialized, that is a local variable now. We're going to go step over here. We have sum now. And let's start debugging, right? So what I want to do, I'm just going to go each iteration. So I see sum is 0 right now. It starts at 0. Let's see what is the first calculation. Sum becomes 1, which is totally fine. Now I'm going to go second iteration. I is 1 now, basically at number 2, right? So I'm going to go step over again. And I have sum 3, which is totally fine because 1 plus 2 is 3, and that's what I expect. I'm going to go with the third iteration. Okay, I is 2 now. So it's going to be the value of 3 here, the element with the value 3. And 3 plus 3 is 6, which is totally correct. Let's do the next one. Okay, the next I is 3. So at the index 3, we have 4. So 6 plus 4, I expect 10. And I get 10, which is totally fine. I execute again. And here we go. We didn't go to the next element, right? So here we go to the return statement, and once we actually go step over, we'll go to return. We also can go step return, right? At any point that you identify the problem, you can go back to the main method with this button. But right now we are return anyway, so I'm gonna step over. So we come back here and we return 10. But what happened with the last element, 5, right? We skipped it. So I understand, okay, the problem is I don't get to that index. It means the condition that I set here, something is wrong with it. So the solution is going to be, okay, if I have minus 1 here, I can actually remove this minus 1. So I don't get to the 4th index, or I can go ahead and say less or equal to, right? The 4th index, and that's going to be another way. So I'm going to go ahead, stop it, run just simply, and I get sum is 15, right? So this is going to be another way how to debug, and actually using the debug mode in your IDE, which is very useful in many situations. And one of the ways you can use it is identify the bug, and another way is actually understand more complex applications. For example, you would join a company that would have a framework ready, right? So there would be a lot of code that you just familiarize in the first days, and you need to understand. And it's not always straightforward. So what you can do is just go ahead and put breakpoints, and go through the code in the debug mode and understand what actually happens step by step. And the last part, how to exit the debug mode, right? First of all, I can just untoggle all of the breakpoints that I have. And here in the right corner, what we're going to have is basically Java perspective, right? So we have debug perspective, and we're going to just click on Java perspective. We'll get to the one that we had initially. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.